Okay, we are now live.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the April 28th, 2021 City of Asheville Multimodal Transportation Commission meeting. My name is Dennis Wenzel, and I'm the chair of this group. Our meetings are being held virtually for the time being, hopefully not for too much longer, but we do have multiple ways for you to participate in this gathering. You can watch live through the City of Asheville's YouTube channel or via our engagement portal. You can listen live by calling into our audio feed. Voicemail public comments can be submitted through our meeting voicemail box. Email comments can be submitted through our meeting email address. And all of these details, including the links and the phone numbers, can be found on the Multimodal Transportation Commission page of the City of Asheville website. Visiting this page is the best way to participate in our meeting. Members and staff guests, I please ask you to remember to keep your microphones muted at all times when not speaking so we can minimize feedback and other background noise. I would like to now welcome our commission members. Members, when I call your name, please introduce yourself and let us know what interest you represent. Randy Warren.
Hi, I'm Randy Warren, and I'm on the Bike and Ped Task Force.
Hey, Randy. Michael Stratton.
Hey, I'm Michael Stratton. I was formerly on the Bike Pedestrian Task Force, but I think today we're going to officially make me an at-large member.
Excellent. Is Kenny with us? No Kenny today. Pat? All right. Lydia.
Hi, I'm Lydia Buer, and I'm on the Greenway Committee.
Hey, Lydia. No. John.
I am John Bausoni, and I represent the Transit Committee.
Hey, John. Is Maggie with us?
Hey, I'm here, but I won't be on video for a little while. Hello, everybody. I'm Maggie, and I'm at large.
Hey, Maggie, welcome. Anna cannot join us today. Joe?
Hi, everyone. Joe Archibald. I am the multimodal liaison to, or the Planning and Zoning Commission liaison to multimodal. Get that direction straight.
Thanks, Joe. And Kim? Kim may be joining us a little bit later. All right. We're going to slide to our first order of business. That is review and approve today's agenda for the agenda for April 28th, 2021. Do I have a motion to approve?
I will make a motion.
Well, before we do, can I ask for something I felt like might have been missing from the agenda for a future item?
What I'll do is I'll get a motion in a second, then we'll have some discussion, and then we can make some adjustments then, if that's okay.
Okay.
All right, so I got a motion from John, and Michael, do you second?
Sure, if we can just discuss the amendment afterward, I guess.
That is perfect. Okay, is there any comments or adjustments?
Yes.
Michael,
Okay, so I was just wondering if we could add to the future agenda discussion about the number of homes that would be that would precipitate the need for sidewalks to be included. So we talked about this at our last meeting, that currently the number is set at 20 houses before a developer would have to include sidewalks into the plan. And we discussed the idea that we were going to have a little bit more discussion on this. Can we have that added to the future agenda items?
Yes, we can definitely do that. And actually, we'll be talking about it a little bit later. That will surprise. It'll be part of our retreat as well. So we have so many exciting things just around the corner. And one of those will be discussing that precise issue.
Thank you.
Okay, so without any other comments or adjustments to today's agenda. All right, let's have a quick vote on that. Randy?
Aye.
Michael?
Aye.
Lydia?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Maggie?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. Motion carries. Excellent. The next item is to review and approve our minutes from the March 24th, 2021 meeting. Do I have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve that.
Thank you, Michael. And a second.
I will second.
Great. A motion and a second. And any comments or adjustments to the minutes? All right. Without comment, we will go to a vote. I'll start again with Randy.
Aye.
Michael?
Aye.
Lydia?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
And Maggie?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. Motion carries. Excellent. Public comment. We did have one comment that came in. Do we have anybody online? Any public commenters yet, or any other comments that come in? We did have one comment. Sorry, please, Amy.
I was just saying we do not have any other live public comments.
Okay, great. Thank you. We did have one comment from a resident who submitted, I think everyone was copied on this, who submitted their support for the third item in our new business, which is the consideration of the Transit Committee request to become a commission out of itself. So we have some public support. You could read through the details, but they feel that's a good call. So we'll kind of hit that item in a couple of minutes. The first item in new business is the recommendation for Dennis Wenzel to be removed from the Greenway Committee and to be appointed to in an at-large seat. This is kind of some housekeeping measures that we need to do in order to get us aligned with the MMTC rules and procedures document. Right now, we're a little bit out of that. So with these two changes, we'll be in line with that. Can I get a motion to approve?
This is
I'll
Maggie.
motion to approve.
Motion. Oh, then I second Randy.
All right, I go a motion and a second. Any comments on that?
So I know that maybe you've obviously been looking at the rules, so maybe that helps a little bit. But it used to be we had 2 members of MMTC on each of the commissions and then some at-large people. Will we still have 2 members on the commissions if you're not in the committees, if you're not on the Greenway and Michael's not on the Bike and Ped Task Force?
Yes, we actually have 3. Technically, we have 3 on Greenway and Bike and Ped, and we only have 1 at large. So this will kind of realign that. So we have 2 on each of the committees and then 3 at large members. Perfect. Any other comments, questions?
This is Jessica. I was just thinking, so I just want to make sure, as far as at large, who's already at large? Maggie said she was, and then I was not sure if Patricia Katz was on a committee or not. Is she also at large? Oh, there you are, Pat.
I'm not on the other committee.
Okay.
And I'm trying to get off my phone.
So that might make us with 4 at larges. So maybe we made a mistake somewhere, Dennis.
Okay.
Who's on the transit committee? I know John and I think Michael Waddle are.
Correct.
And then Greenways, who's left on Greenways if you're not on there?
Kenny and
Okay.
Lydia, right?
Lydia, okay. And then who's on Bike Ped? Randy and who?
Well, this is Michael. I was on Bike Ped. It's my understanding that like maybe a meeting or so ago that I'd been taken off to an at-large, but
yeah.
Then I saw today that we're going to make that official. So I don't exactly know where I'm figured in on that one.
Okay.
Well, let's do that.
Maybe Dennis, maybe you should be on Bike Ped and Michael be at large.
Okay. What if we did this? What if we voted on the first item, we table the second item, we can get our information correct, and then we can come back next meeting?
Sounds like a good idea.
That sound good? Okay, so let's do a vote for the item 1, which is removing Dennis from the Greenway Committee and appointing him to an at-large seat. Any other comments or questions? Okay. Let me get my list here. Randy.
Aye.
Michael.
Aye.
Pat, welcome, Pat.
Hi, and I'm also, and I could also move over to bicycle and pedestrian as a coordinator as far as my interests go. But for right now, aye.
Okay, great. Lydia.
Aye.
John.
Aye.
And Maggie.
Aye.
Excellent. I vote aye as well. That motion carries. So let's table item 2 to make sure we have all of the information. There's a couple of different documents. What happens, I think there's just a couple of different documents floating out there with lists. We need to make sure that we have the right lists so we are all in compliance here. So if that's, do we need a motion to table? No.
Maggie,
No.
I make a motion to table.
Okay.
It doesn't sound like we need one, so I think we can go forward.
I'll second.
Okay.
You need it.
Okay. I think we're in good shape. So we'll go to the next item, which is consider the Transit Committee request to become a commission. This item I asked to be on the agenda today. There's been some discussion about this in the past. Before, I think many of us were on this commission. And it's coming up again now, and it's possible that we'll make a vote on this in a few minutes. I think essentially the discussion is that there's just so much detail and administration involved in transit that a lot of the requirements may be better suited with a group that's reporting directly to the council. Jessica, do you have some more background on this item?
Sure, I'd be happy to provide a little bit of background that I know of. So in the past, I'm going to say before, I'll say before probably around 2012, there was actually a transit commission, and for reasons that are unknown to me, I'm sure there was a lot of discussion about multimodal transportation in general, and I'm guessing there was an idea that there should be a multimodal transportation commission, and then to have these 3 subcommittees and make the transit commission a transit committee, so a subcommittee of the multimodal. So I think since about 2012, 2013, the structure that we have right now has been in place. And I would say in the last couple of years, there have been some conversations on and off about the possibility of making the transit committee a commission again. And I would say that the conversation kind of stalled out in the last maybe year, mostly because of COVID, but also because we had a lot of turnover at the transit committee as well as on this commission. And so the conversation's been resurrected again. I know Councilwoman Roney is interested in this discussion, and I believe she plans on talking about it or having it be discussed at a future Boards and Commissions Committee meeting. And the Boards and Commissions Committee is a committee of the council that kind of talks about the structures and governance of all of the boards and committees and commissions. And so the transit committee members, I believe, by and large, are in favor of this. And so therefore, I think that it would be great if the Multimodal Commission could weigh in. That way, when it is discussed at Boards and Commissions Committee, there's some additional background, and we can let them know what everybody thinks about it. I think, it's hard to say exactly what the key difference would be between the way it is now and if it were to be a commission. I think technically speaking, the key difference is that commissions are appointed by the council and that commissions have a council liaison assigned, whereas subcommittees do not. So that's technically the only difference. Functionally or practically, there could be some differences in, Firstly, we would probably no longer talk about transit at the Multimodal Commission. And so therefore we would have additional time to discuss non-transit things. There could be some improved lines of communication between a transit commission and the council. One of the things that we would have to talk about is whether there was still an overlap of members between the transit commission and the multimodal commission. So, we would have to make some changes to our bylaws, which is not a big deal. So the logistical side, I think, that's very simple. The practical side, or how will this improve things, is sort of, TBD. I don't know that the information that would go to transit commission instead of transit committee would be any different. It would just be a slightly elevated, conversation, because those folks would have a liaison to the council dedicated to them, just like we do with this commission.
Great, thank you. Kim, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but do you have anything to add to that statement?
Oh, I'm super happy to be put on the spot. So in addition to what Jessica has already offered, there are a couple other considerations. One is right now you have a Greenway meeting, bike ped meeting, transit meeting. We have liaisons from neighborhood and from planning and zoning. We don't yet have a liaison from SACY. This is a lot of staff time. And so a lot of what happens, at least from my experience, is we're watching some of the same conversations happen over and over and over and over again. That's not a bad thing, because we just get more eyes on issues. But one of the key benefits here is that you could have a more focused use of staff time. So, for example, if transit was directly advising council and the multimodal is directly advising council, you might advance the transit master plan and the upcoming GAP plan more efficiently. It's not necessarily that you wouldn't discuss transit in your meetings. I would definitely suggest there still be liaisons, because it is part of multimodal transportation. But being able to advise this the council on this transit as a core service, I think, could be a really important benefit of this. I think also it would make sense to look at having the crossover, but also have sustainability re-invited to the conversation. Not that we don't all very specifically care about it, but it might help to have some of that additional crossover between these meetings, so that we don't have this, siloing happening. Right now, we also have the Downtown Commission Subcommittee on Parking and Transportation. So a lot of time parking isn't necessarily brought up in the multimodal meeting, but we could really start to look at where these webs of conversations could be maybe amplified in a better use of our time, instead of siloed and spin-offs, so that we're not really having a holistic conversation about moving people more efficiently. My hope is that if we can save some time in our meetings, then we can also really start to talk about meaningful conversations about accessibility, because we have some accessibility issues in Asheville that are really needing to be addressed, not just in construction, but in maintenance of our facilities. So the Transit Committee, I was just looking at these meeting minutes, back in early 2020, made a recommendation to the multimodal. What I would expect from this group is if you find some wisdom in this, that it is within your role to advise us on whether or not this is a good idea. Some of the cons could be that that spin out of maybe it's re-siloing, maybe it's putting transit in this other bucket instead of having it part of the whole conversation. You might not want to see that as an advice to give, and I would be grateful to hear that as well.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, I think that gives us some good, thoughts. Maybe we can get a motion in a second that we can have a little conversation. Does that sound good with everyone? So if we can get a motion to recommend, we'll start with a motion to recommend. See if we have to substitute that. recommend that the Transit Committee becomes a commission. Can I get a motion?
I'll make a motion.
All right,
Randy,
Michael,
why don't you go ahead?
Okay.
and a second.
Sure. I'll second. Michael can.
Okay.
Motion. I'll
Randy,
second.
Excellent. So we have Michael with the motion and Randy with the second. So let's get some discussion going here. Where are people at? How's everybody feeling about this?
So one thing is that when we had this come up before, the Transit Committee was in a state of flux and a lot of membership shifting and stuff too. So we didn't feel like it was really in a place to move forward at that time. So now I don't sit on the Transit Committee or anything too. So I want to know from the people maybe that are on the Transit Committee if they feel like that group is in a really stable position right now with good leadership and good solid membership, that they would be in a position to transition well into a commission role.
Well, this is Kim. I will just go ahead and say quite honestly that if a board or commission is not meeting regularly, it is hard to maintain regular attendance and engagement. And the Transit Committee, to my memory, has met maybe 3 or 4 times total in the past year. That said, we still have a quorum showing up. There is a new chair. I think that there's an opportunity to get folks more plugged in and to make sure that everyone has the skills that they need so that we have a constant support for leadership roles. But those are really good concerns to name.
Michael? Oops, excuse me.
So I would just like to concur with what Randy had said. I think the idea it was good, but it wasn't quite where it needed to be. It sounds like, from my understanding, they are, I think well formed at this point and have a good leader in place. So that checks my box on that one. The other one I would have would be I would just like to recommend that we do still continue to have a little bit of carryover, having a representative on this commission that also holds a seat on that, vice versa, because these are overlaying items, and I think it's good that we aren't siloed, like you'd mentioned, Kim, and I think this is a good way to keep one from being siloed to the other.
Lydia?
I'd also like to agree kind of with what Michael said and Randy. Also just say that I do think it's really important as the city's growing that transit is going to grow and is going to need to coordinate with the county and all of that. So having our own commission for that, but then also definitely coordinating because, Greenways Bike Ped is that last mile. It's that last part of the trip that needs to coordinate. So just that.
Right. Joe?
Yeah, definitely. I think that still having that connection from the Transit Commission, when and if it becomes a commission, to this group, it could be as simple as it's those updates like I give and that Anna gives. And if, this committee is not seeing all of those, ridership reports and all of that other stuff, that's what the commission's doing. But if there's some new information or perhaps there's some route change or some major thing that they need to vote on and say take to council, maybe it gets reviewed here at Multimodal, gets support of Multimodal, then the Transit Commission could say we have support of Multimodal, the Transit Commission supports it, and it's kind of the bigger collective pushing that thing forward. So
good deal. Pat?
I agree that multimodal includes transit, and we need to keep the network together. There's you need to have handicap accessibility on sidewalks to get you to a train or transit or bus. Bikes are now on buses. I think it's all kind of a web, and it needs to stay connected.
Jessica?
I was just going to mention, from a budget perspective, transit is certainly the one that the city dedicates the most funding to in terms of transportation. But also just overall, it's one of the largest line items in the city budget. Not that that necessarily is the driving factor but for a decision like this, but it is something that we spend a very large amount of money on and has a lot of impact overall from a financial standpoint.
Great. Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, I mean, I feel like the residents and visitors to Asheville deserve the best possible transportation system we can provide them. And, you know, partially I worry that we were not maybe getting the job done here. So, that bothers me a little bit, but I feel like this is definitely something that we should try. It seems like there's a lot of history behind this concept. So it's something that I can certainly support. And when I go through each month and I read those documents and I'm reading about breakdowns and mobile repair, bus repairs, and on-time reports, I can read all that, but it's hard for me to really have an understanding of perspective of what all that data means. So I do like the idea of a group that's really digging in and focusing on that information. And I think that will help to make that system even stronger and more productive. Any other comment?
This is Maggie. I'd love to chime in. Sorry, I'm not on video yet.
Please.
Here's what I love about this. Commissions that have direct lines to council just have a different relationship with policy making. And I think it's really important to listen to what matters and give voice to what matters. And I think transit's super duper important, as is multimodal stuff, which, as Patricia said, incorporates transit as well. So I like that idea of putting more voices to the places that are more important to us. And I see potential risks and struggle with this of siloing. I think I'm trying to think in like a productive sense of what could we do now to not just say we recommend this, but to recommend this with some type of structure or caveat to like hedge against that risk of siloing. And the only thing I can think of on the fly is perhaps the city council liaison to MMTC is also the same city council liaison to transit, so that that we have the opportunity for that policy liaison to be connecting the dots across the two groups. Because at the end of the day, the transit committee as is having different conversations than we are. And I think that if you were to have two different council people liaising and serving and advising agenda, et cetera, that might run into a dynamic where there's competition across the content areas. And like, that would be very bad. Like that to me defeats the purpose of networked transportation that is people centered, period. Because I don't care if you're on a bus, a bike, on your feet, transportation should be about the people. So that might be an amendment to the recommendation of, I like this idea, I would support it, and perhaps we ask council to consider that the liaison from council is the same person for both committees.
Great. Any other comments? Maggie, do you want to make a motion of substitution?
Wait.
Oh, sorry, John. I didn't see you there.
Sorry. That's all right. So a couple things. So I'm on the transit committee currently. I actually attended my first meeting last month because they have not been meeting regularly. And there seems to be, the transit committee wants to meet regularly, but there seems to be a disconnect between the committee and the city as to making that happen in the virtual format. So I think that meeting on a regular basis is going to help the committee move its agenda forward, number one, whether it's a committee or it's a commission reporting directly to council. And the concerns that I have heard from the other committee members is that they feel that transit doesn't have a strong enough voice in this commission. And I think that is just because of the magnitude of transit. It's there's a lot of moving parts. It's a really big budget, as a few others mentioned. And I think that going forward, that there's more accountability, I think, if it's reporting directly to council. It is still in flux. I don't know that it's solid yet, but meeting regularly and reporting directly to council, I think that those two things will help facilitate that.
Yeah.
John, who staffs the transit committee from the city side?
I do not know.
So maybe
Kim?
part of this too isn't just that they report to council and have a council liaison, but that there's dedicated staffing. Or Jessica, could you illuminate a little more?
There's dedicated staffing. So transportation department, transit is one division of our department, and the transit committee is primarily staffed by Eunice Lovey, who is the transit planning manager, and then also whatever staff that she has up until recently, we were down 2 positions in transit. We just filled one, and her name is Haley Burton. She started last week. And then we are in the process of hiring a grants manager. So Eunice has been very much shorthanded in transit, which is one of the reasons, but not the only reason why they haven't been meeting as regularly. I do agree that they need to be back to a monthly schedule, regardless of whether they're a committee or a commission. I think from a logistical standpoint, we can make that happen technologically, if you will. Just like we're doing now with you guys. So technologically, we can handle that. And again, whether it's a committee or a commission, I think that we should be meeting monthly. They should be meeting monthly, and we should be meeting monthly.
Great.
The problem has been, I would say, that there's so many boards and commissions and committees across the city. I don't know exactly how many. I'm going to guess like 25 or so, that not everybody is positioned to be able to do that. And so I think that to have monthly meetings. And so I think that there's been this kind of, I don't know what to call it, but not wanting to treat the different groups differently. And so, especially in the beginning of the pandemic, there was this thought of like, well, since we have to do all of this technological stuff behind the scenes that requires a lot of people and a lot of work, that, it should be as needed. And then as more people got trained, such as Amy Tessner, we found that we were able to do multimodal commission, but not everybody else across the city has had that ability yet. And so I think there's just been this fear that's been driving some of the decision making over whether to have the meetings or not, and not wanting different groups to be treated differently. But I think at the end of the day, we as a department are positioned to be able to pull it off. So I feel that we should pull it off. And I think it's important. So that's my 2 cents.
Excellent.
How do we make that happen, Jessica? The meeting, to begin meeting monthly, how do we advance that? I guess like how does it start?
Well,
you know what I mean?
Well, I think my suggestion, and what I think I'll do, and perhaps I'll ask Councilwoman Roney to assist me, is I will talk to the administration and say, hey, we have the staff support, we have the need, we have the technology figured out, we can do this. And so we just would like to have like a blanket approval to have these meetings on a monthly basis. That's kind of what I did for this commission too. I just kind of said, listen, we've got the need, we've got the resources, and and I didn't get any pushback about it. So I think that's the approach that we will take with Transit Committee as well. And I think what I'll do is I'll CC Kim, and maybe she can chime in as a support for it.
And maybe we could include that in part of our motion.
Yeah.
Randy?
So this is just a primer for something in the future, perhaps, and I don't know exactly what an authority does, but a lot of cities have transit authorities, and that's different, I know, than a commission in terms of more runs the department, but or it has like a board level running, rather not a staff level running. But anyway, I think though, if we move this to a commission or a committee, we should look at the bigger picture too. Is that the appropriate place for it to be, or should we look at if an authority is appropriate for Asheville or not? But at least explore that option, because obviously our transit system is not anywhere what it could be, and the potential is great. So we should carefully look at the path forward to making it the resource that it could be in our community, and whether a commission is the appropriate place for that advisory board to be, or if we should look on restructuring the whole thing and creating an authority. That's something I think we should at least look at to make sure that we have the best transit system we can possibly have here.
I agree. I completely agree.
This is Maggie. I love that. And it makes me think of, like, if we're just breaking out of the request on the table to make it a commission, if we're saying like what we need, I would think we should have the county participating in whatever we do for that thing. If we really look at what does the transit really need, I could see a interagency participation being meaningful also.
Any other comments?
I was about to say, tying off of what you're saying, Randy, that it seems like making transit a commission is that first step to the bigger thing. And to tie in what Maggie's saying, that, yeah, it goes from the committee to a commission. And then as, you know, Buncombe looks at, and Asheville and Buncombe look together at expanding transit, maybe it's the Asheville Buncombe Regional Transit Authority. And it's, you know, there, at that point, I think it's at least that step that needs to be made to get it to the next level from just being a subcommittee right now.
And I would keep it open that transit also could be used to bring people in from the outside counties, because we have such a issue with low income housing for middle income housing, that there's a lot of people coming in from outside, that we open it up to like Haywood and Jackson or whatever, to extend our arms and our welcome out, rather than my experience coming from Atlanta as every county became its own little transit. If we can be open to bringing them into the fold and benefiting them, I would like to say is open to that concept.
Great. Thanks.
I love that idea, but I also I think we need to start with the commission, and I think that we also need to know what people want, you know, because somebody in Haywood County, is that something they want? You know, it's like we have to engage the community. I feel like that would take a much larger undertaking, but I think starting some sort of a regional authority at some point, moving in that direction is great. But starting with Buncombe County is probably where you have to start, because even that's a reach right now. There's plenty of places in Buncombe County where people don't have appropriate access to public transit, convenient access, which means regular routes, so that they can get to and from work, or wherever people need to go to school, things like that. So I do think starting with the commission is the way to go, and then we can move from there.
I'm just thinking that you keep the language open to that you don't box us into like this is only Buncombe County or something like that. That we have that long range view in mind as we build towards it.
I think using the term regional maybe could work for that, right?
Yeah, I feel
Yes.
you were going to make. I'm sorry, Pat, please. I feel like we're going to make a recommendation here, and we have a couple of things going for us. Number one is I think that it's a clear sign that this is going to be looked at and figure out what form it makes the most sense for it to be as efficient and productive for our residents. We also have the benefit that Councilwoman Roney is here listening to this, and she hears what we're talking about. So I have 100% confidence that all of these elements will be included in this conversation going forward. So that makes me feel really good. Is there any other comments or discussion? Okay, great.
This is Kim. Dennis, before I send this to the full council, I will do what I've done in the past, which is type up a report and send it to you to share with the full commission, just to make sure that I captured everyone's individual comments with accuracy. And thank you everyone for what you've offered for today.
Great, that sounds excellent. Michael made a comment, can we include crossover votes as part of the motion? Michael, can you explain what you're looking to talk about there?
So as we have it currently, we have a representative that's on the transit committee, and they vote on, in our commission on topics that come up. And then I assume that representative also has a voting interest on the committee. If that committee becomes a commission, I just ask that structure stays intact.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a good point to kind of, I feel like we're giving a lot of good information here for potential structure for the next generation of this committee, commission, authority, whatever it might be. So I like a lot of this. I'm not sure how we wrap all this up into a motion that sends a clear message of what we're trying to do. But Maggie, do you want to give it a shot?
Sure, no problem. I think what I would say is I would make a motion. What I'm going to do, team, is kind of talk about the principle that I'm hearing from folks, and then use examples for council to consider when looking at the structure, because there's a lot of different ideas, but I don't want to be prescriptive of that at this point, because it sounds like we need to do some good thinking on it. So the motion I would suggest would be that our commission fully supports the idea of restructuring the current subcommittee, the current transit subcommittee, so that it has so that it is not a subcommittee of this commission, and that it is a standalone advisory body to policymakers. And ways that might look would be having a council liaison who is on both committees. That might look like being a regional authority, or exploring what, an authority looks like at a broader level. But at the minimum, we think that this committee needs to be staffed monthly and operate monthly, and that it is not a subcommittee of this, so that it receives the time that is due. That's a lot of words.
Yeah.
Hopefully that works.
Jessica, how do you feel about that motion? Should we try to truncate it a little bit, or you feel good about it?
This is Kim, can I ask that it be worded that the multimodal advises council?
Yes.
I would love to have your advice. So that might be the way to make a motion.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good to me. Okay, so we have, I'm not sure if I'm trying to write this down here.
Do you want me to try and do it one more time, more concise?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay, let's see if I can do it. Our committee advises that council revisit the structure of the current transit subcommittee so that it has more direct access to policymakers, and at a minimum that this committee needs to meet and be staffed monthly, and with while also considering the potential for broadening to have regional transit conversations. Did I hit
Perfect.
everyone's thoughts?
That sounds good. Can I get a second?
A second.
John with a second. All right. Without any other discussion, are we ready for a vote? Okay. Randy.
Aye.
Michael.
I'm just not happy with the motion itself. I'm gonna have to vote no.
Okay, that's a no. Pat.
Aye.
Lydia.
Aye.
John.
Aye.
Maggie.
Aye.
And I'm an aye as well, and the motion carries. Thanks, everyone. And I think, Michael, you had some comments, and I think those details, I think we can communicate detail greater than what's included in our motion, and I think it can be effective, and I think it'll be included. I've received a message from Kim on an issue in the past, and it's very detailed. So I'm looking forward to getting that so I can share it to you just to make sure you feel whole about what we're saying. And if not, we can always include additional information in the future as well.
Yeah, and if I overlooked if I missed something, Michael,
No, I mean,
I'm happy. Yeah, okay.
I mean, I think what you're saying in the motion gets to the heart of it, but I think just a very concise way of granting that committee the same opportunity that this commission has is just by default calling it a commission, because just that verbiage alone connotes certain differences, like, for example, access to a liaison to council. So I think that's just the biggest point of contention I have. I just want to really make sure that body has direct line of to council.
Yeah, your point's taken, Michael. I feel like we've communicated that. I really do. I don't feel like that's part's left out. I feel like the direction we're trying to move transit is closer to our leadership, and that the benefits of that, rather than further away. So I feel like we got there. I respect your opinion here, and I'm not trying to walk you away from your downvote, but I do feel like we communicated that piece of information. All right. Thank you, everyone. Okay, the next item that we have on our agenda is just a notification that we will be having a Multimodal Transportation Commission retreat coming up. I am very hopeful. There's some pieces that are slowly coming together here. I'm very hopeful that we can do this in person. I'm kind of dragging my feet a little bit so we can get to that point where we can meet in person. I think that's really important for us as a group to do this, to really kind of coalesce over some important issues. One of those issues that have brought up was, to Michael's point that he brought up earlier, about the UDL issues with sidewalk installation and the number of housing units. There's a lot of things to untangle within the UDL, and so that's right now tentatively that might be one of the issues that we talk about. There's also there's some discussion of something that's like the GAP plan, but since the GAP plan is coming together, potentially we could also include that if the timing works out, so we can do a deep dive there as well. So there's a lot of pieces that will come together there, but just wanted to let you know that that's in the works. And in the meantime, there's a lot of good documents that we have access to. At the bottom of all of our agenda, there's a link to these documents, but a couple of them that were brought up that we may all want to brush up on are the 2018 Transit Master Plan, the Asheville in Motion Plan, and then the Multimodal White Paper. And Randy, are there any other ones you wanted to bring up that kind of makes sense to put some perspective around this, or anybody?
Sorry. Well, there is the bike plan too, but it's from 2012, I think, so it's pretty outdated. But at the same time, we should be somewhat aware of it, because the AIM plan does not replace other plans; it includes those plans. So that's important for us to understand. The AIM plan refers to other plans that exist, and I think it specifically states there this is not a replacement, but it kind of is supposed to. And there was issues with the AIM plan too, so we need to make sure that we don't put all our eggs in that basket.
Yeah, your points were taken. Actually, I did have that in a note, and I didn't include it, so I apologize. But yeah, the bike plan as well. There are links to all of this on our agenda, the agenda. And it's just, there's a lot of really good information. It gets pretty dense. There's a lot of information that's in there, but I think it's good for us to kind of go in there with our heads, bouncing around all of these concepts so we can really be as productive as possible for this event. So just let you know, once the dates are starting to come out, we'll get some dates floating around and get some topics hammered out. Things are coming together. Maggie's helping out and kind of putting this together, and it's really looking very, very good. Next issue is the draft the permanent right-of-way closure policy. Jessica.
Okay. Amy, would you mind presenting the slideshow for me on my behalf? Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So this is something that we've talked about off and on. I think everybody here has been through at least one or two right-of-way closure reviews and recommendations. And the policy that we have prepared is attached to your agenda, and as well as the existing state law. And so basically what we're talking about here is permanent right-of-way closure requests. And we were in desperate need of updating the policy surrounding that, and making sure that it complies with state law, but also reflects what the city objectives and goals are with regard to these right-of-ways. You can go to the next slide. So it's kind of a dense presentation, and I encourage you guys to ask me questions either throughout the presentation or at the end, or both. And so, of course, I'll talk a little bit about the purpose and the objectives, what it applies to. I've included a bunch of slides that show examples of previous right-of-way closure requests. I'm not going to go through every single one in detail, but the point is to kind of show you the spectrum of requests that we get and will likely continue to get. And the purpose of that is to kind of show you what you're likely to see, and if there are ways that we should tailor the policy to address this broad spectrum of types of right-of-way closure requests. I will talk a little bit about planning documents and the UDO and how that relates to these requests, the state law, of course, and the considerations that we are outlining in the policy that we think would be useful when considering these types of requests. So the criteria might not be the right word, but evaluation considerations. And also we'll talk about how even if you do close a right-of-way, you can still keep an easement for public purposes within that right-of-way. And then the last part is really just related to the procedural application process. And then at the very end, I have a few questions that I would like to get some feedback from you specifically on. Next slide, please. So the overall purpose is to provide additional guidance, both for citizens or individuals requesting these closures and also for city staff. Of course, we need to comply with North Carolina state law, and that is included in your agenda. And really the purpose of the policy is to inform everybody about the process and the timeline, and to include some guidelines or criteria, evaluation tools, if you will, when considering these. Next slide. The objectives are essentially just a little bit more detailed than the purpose, but we want to establish the minimum required information and documentation that needs to be provided by an applicant when they request the closure. We want to establish the guidance for consideration, and this is really important, we have to ensure that such requests do not eliminate property access and egress, and that it is not contrary to the public interest. And I'll talk a little bit more about that specific wording later. We want to establish the procedure and the responsibilities of both the applicant and the city staff and the Multimodal Commission, et cetera. And we are hoping that this will also improve coordination between these types of closure requests and any associated development applications that might be related to the request. Next slide. So basically, this policy is going to be applicable to any public right-of-way, and that means that it is, or any portion, I should say, of a right-of-way that has been irrevocably dedicated to the public without regard to whether it has actually been opened. And that can get a little confusing, but basically what we have are, a lot of our, neighborhoods and streets were platted out in the late 1800s, early 1900s. They just sort of made these grids with all of these what we sometimes you might hear them called paper streets, but they don't actually exist in real life as a street. And so there's a lot of confusion sometimes about what these paper streets are, and are they public or are they not, and who owns them. And it can get very confusing, even to attorneys, and I won't pretend to be an expert in this area, but what I can tell you is that for a street to be considered public and opened, two things have to happen. So the property owner has to offer to dedicate it, and then the city has to accept it. So there could be the act of dedicating it is actually when it was platted. So if something was platted back in the 1920s, that therefore was the offer of dedication, but the city never accepted it. So therefore the city doesn't own it. The city doesn't maintain it. It may not, exist in real life. So it's not considered open because there was never the acceptance of that right of way. So even though the city doesn't own it or maintain it, we still are kind of the caretaker. Well, that might not be the best word either, but we are in charge of closing it if there's a request, even though it's not ours to use. The council, per state law, has the obligation to make the decision over whether or not it should be released from, the domain and then be allowed to be used just by private landowners. Does anybody have any questions about this before I move on?
Yeah, I've got a question on that.
Michael, please.
Sure.
Is there a statute of limitations on how long a city can go without accepting that initial dedication? So if it was in the 20s that it was platted, but we just sat on our feet for the longest time, but we wanted to accept it now, could that happen?
I do not believe there's a statute of limitations, and I believe that if we wanted to accept it, we could. And I think there are times when we would potentially do that. So a lot of times when we deny a closure request, it's because there's a likelihood that we are going to need it for something, right? Like a greenway or bike lane or something. And so at that time, we would accept it and take over the responsibility for maintaining it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're just getting into the examples here. and we'll go through these kind of quickly. But this one was one from a few years ago. It was a proposed medical facility development, and there was a paper right-of-way within this parcel. It didn't actually connect to any of the, or it didn't connect through, so there wasn't any real ability for a connection of any kind. And so this is just one example that has come before this group before. Next slide. This one was a fun one. This one was more recent, and it was related to a hotel development that was proposed that ultimately was denied by the council. This one is a alley that is privately owned but actively used. The applicant was proposing to close the very tail end of the alley and utilize that area for access to the hotel garage that was being proposed. And ultimately, I think the Multimodal Commission did not recommend approval on this, and the council also didn't approve the hotel. But it's just another example of, you know, this is an alley in downtown that's actually in real life exists, is utilized by lots of businesses, but is privately owned and maintained. So it's just another kind of weird variation on that. Next slide, please.
Jessica, real quick, on that last example, was that alley never accepted by the city? It was kind of in that limbo state?
Yeah, I think so. I just realized when I was saying that it was privately owned and maintained. I think that I should have said just privately maintained.
Okay.
It was not privately owned. If it were, then they wouldn't have to ask us. But yeah, it's an alley that is privately maintained and never accepted by the city.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't getting my signals crossed here. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Just real quick on that one, their view of how it fit into multimodal was different than our view too. So that's why it was really important for it to come to multimodal, because they don't have the same perspective we do, and we added that perspective that they just didn't have. So I think that's a really good example.
Mm-hmm. This next one is another kind of weird one where the development of the Jewish Community Center, this is over by Charlotte Street and Hillside Street. The paper alley here, well, it was actually used as an alley, I believe, never accepted. And the intention was that when this development was built, that it was supposed to be closed, but it didn't get closed as part of the process. And then they came back subsequently, or I don't recall how it got resurrected, but the need for it to be closed because it's basically, there's a parking lot there. They didn't want people cutting through, but ultimately we did close it. And, but it's just an example of one that was supposed to have taken place or should have taken place probably in conjunction with the development of this property, but didn't. Next slide, please. This one is maybe a more straightforward one, but it was also associated with a redevelopment project. You can see there's a red area and a blue area. Both of those were unopened alleys, paper right-of-ways that were never accepted. The intention of closing these was to allow for more developable space. I believe this one was approved because there wasn't a whole lot of benefit from a transportation perspective of keeping these since there was already access to all the other parcels from the main roadways. Next slide, please. This one is also unique, and we've been seeing a lot more of these types of requests. And in fact, we might be bringing one of these to you month, but this is what I would call a partial right-of-way closure. So the yellow areas on there are what they were asking to be closed, and I recognize this map is a little confusing, but basically there was a very wide right-of-way associated with Craven Street. There's not really a need for it to be that wide. They needed to have some of that right-of-way, slivers of that right-of-way provided to them so that they could build some, I think it was drainage structures and potentially provide some on-street parking. I can't remember exactly, but it's not, it's not like a full width of, or a full chunk of a piece of paper right-of-way. It's what I would call like a sliver of right-of-way. Next slide, please. This one was also interesting. This is over off of Haywood Road. I think it was a bank that someone wanted to turn into a veterinary office, and the orange line was the right-of-way, and the person owned the properties both north and south of that little right-of-way, and they wanted to close that so that they could combine the parcels and be able to build a new structure. From a transportation or any other kind of connectivity perspective, it wasn't really necessary, but there was some opposition from the neighboring property, the big parcel just to the east of it, that thought that they were going to lose access to that side of their property. Technically, the law says that you have to maintain ingress and egress from every parcel, but it doesn't say that you necessarily have to allow access from every side of the parcel. So this one was a little challenging, but ultimately was approved. And I don't know that project ever moved forward in real life, but this is just another example, fun example for you. Next slide. I think this might be one of our last ones. This one is in the Kenilworth area and is a paper right-of-way. There's an existing water line there, and the applicant wanted to have that right-of-way closed so that they could do an addition to their single-family home that would, be enlarged on that side into the right-of-way. Ultimately, this was denied because of the water line. If there wasn't a utility there, then it might be a more difficult decision to make whether or not that's appropriate. Next slide. Okay, so our existing planning documents and codes, we've included a few references to things that either directly relate to right-of-way closures or sort of indirectly relate. Obviously, connectivity and land use is a big part of these paper right-of-ways. I mean, they were set out back in the day in order to provide a form and function of the land use and transportation. And so, what we are charged with is making sure that we're not doing something contrary to that. And so the comprehensive plan speaks very, very broadly about encouraging responsible growth, improving the multimodal transportation network, improving connectivity, and facilitating the movement of people and goods, and so on. Next slide. As we go down, past the comprehensive plan down into the UDO, so the Unified Development Ordinance, that is the actual code, and it is what contains the land use and regulations of how we use that. We also have, for the downtown, we have some design review guidelines. Guidelines are not code, but they provide some guidance on what we'd like to see in the downtown. So one of the things that is in the downtown design review guidelines, and obviously is only applicable to downtown, is the idea of key pedestrian streets. And the guidelines and the UDO actually require that alleys be used for access for vehicles and services when the only other option is a key pedestrian street. And so that's something that comes into play with like the Create 72 project, for example, and another one that we had a few months ago off of Aston Street, where there was a request to close an alley. The only other option is a key pedestrian street. And so the idea is you want to encourage loading and unloading and access for services in those alleys, and that we want to preserve them for that purpose. The UDO and the downtown design review guidelines also emphasize the need to limit curb cuts. And so that's a big issue in terms of accessibility and wanting to enhance the pedestrian environment and not have it cut up with a bunch of different driveways. The Asheville in Motion Transportation Plan, I don't believe it talks specifically about right-of-ways or alleys, but the overall concept of network connectivity, especially for pedestrians and bicyclists, and having a grid in place and making connections is something that is an overall guiding principle of the AIM plan. Next slide, please. Okay, so state law is pretty vague overall about this. Essentially, it says that the city council is required to close a public right-of-way if it's requested. They have to adopt a resolution in declaring the intention to close the alley. Then they have to set a public hearing. There has to be 4 weeks of advertising and public notice between the intent to close resolution and the actual public hearing. And we also have to put notification in 2 places along the street or alley to be closed. And we have to send certified mail to adjoining property owners. So that's all in the actual legislation. And that drives a lot of the process that we follow. And state law also requires that the right-of-way closure be filed after the public hearing, obviously, if it's approved. Next slide. Okay, so here's where we get into the language that makes this a little bit more interesting. There's a difference between something being in the public interest and being contrary to the public interest. I know it sounds very, very much like the same thing, but there is some nuance to it. And since we are, beholden to state law, we have to think about it more from the perspective of, is this request contrary to the public interest? That doesn't mean that we can't look at different criteria or guidelines or whatever, but we have to think about it as, it's not about, is it providing a public benefit? It's, is it contrary to the public interest? Does that make sense? So it doesn't have to provide the public anything in addition per se. We just have to make sure that it's not contrary to the public interest overall. And of course, on an individual level, we can't deprive anybody of reasonable means of accessing their property. Does anybody have any question about that before I go on?
What's an example of something that would be contrary to the public interest?
That's a great question. I think that when we get into the criteria, it does speak to, something contrary to the public interest, in my opinion, would be it's blocking access or blocking future connectivity. It's going to remove all opportunity for a needed connection. That's the kind of thing that comes to my mind. It may not be important to the adjoining property owners, but overall, the public interest could be damaged if it were closed.
Yeah, I think sometimes the private interest would take precedent over public interest. So if someone was trying to close the street so that they could, build a building which then denied public and be able to access another area, the private person's like, yeah, I'm going to make lots of money off this. This is great. You just go around 2 more blocks. And that'd be against public interest. They should be able to cut through that street being blocked off so that they, the public,
I'll just say that this was a big conversation that and part of the reason why this has been kind of held up is this concept of contrary to the public interest versus in the public interest. And I'll say that the first draft of this policy, it was written more like, does this provide a public benefit? For example, is it going to allow there to be additional units of public housing provided? Or is it going to, basically like, you prove to me that you should be allowed to do this and you're going to give us something in return kind of approach. And we were basically told through our attorney that we can't really approach it like that. It can't be like, you have to provide us something that's a public benefit in order to do this. We have to think of it as, are you taking something away? And we can't even really consider what it is that they're going to do with it. We can ask, but we can't make them say, with this extra land, I am going to do X, Y, and Z, and we can't judge, if you will, whether that's okay or not, or that if we are in agreement with that or not. Does that make sense? We have to kind of suspend judgment over the reason and just focus on, does this hurt the public interest? Which is sometimes difficult to separate. Next slide. Okay, so I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but we've included in the next few slides several what we're calling considerations for evaluating. So there's some very obvious ones about access. Does it provide access to other properties that if you take it away, they'll be interrupted? Does it provide connectivity for multimodal? Would eliminating this have a significant impact? Looking at whether or not the request is consistent with the comp plan and other city plans and policies. So, is it consistent with or supported by any other city plan or policy? The ones that probably are the most related, of course, are the AIM plan, the comp plan, the UDO, etc. Community support. And these are not necessarily requirements. They don't necessarily need the whole neighborhood to support it. But if there is some kind of support that's demonstrated, particularly from the abutting property owners, actually the abutting property owners or anybody that accesses or fronts that proposed right away, they do need to say that they support it. But beyond that, neighborhood support or whatever isn't required, but if they have it, that would be a great thing to use as a consideration. Current use, is it actively used? So is it kind of like the 72, create 72? Or is it just a paver right of way that doesn't exist and you wouldn't know it was there unless you were looking at a plat? Next slide. Function, this is speaking more to the grid and whether there is a grid or not. Could there be a grid created if this were not closed? And are there any potential future connections? And the next one is basically similar to that, but this is speaking a little bit more towards topography. And, you know, sometimes you look at a map and you say, oh, there's a great, or you look at an aerial and it looks really obvious that you can make a connection. But then in real life, you look at the topography and there's little way that there could ever be any kind of connection. So looking at that is a consideration. The next one is a little bit repetitive, but is speaking to the grid and mid-block connections and creating linkages to other existing infrastructure. Environmental, are there any environmental concerns present? Is there any possible negative impact to the natural environment? So this could come into play if you're like near a river or creek or some other environmental resource feature. Next slide. I think this is it. Obviously, utilities, loading, unloading, emergency services, municipal services, those are very important. Are there any other options that might be feasible to preserve the right of way? So could it be like an encroachment or I don't know, an easement instead of a full closure? And then consequence, just trying to remind ourselves that we need to look towards 50 or 100 years from now and what the consequence of that might be. And then public benefit, probably should call it contrary to the public interest. But yeah, basically, would it be contrary to the public interest? So those are all the questions and considerations we've got in the draft. Next slide. Okay. So this one is pretty straightforward. This is also in the state law, and it's just to make a point that even if the city approves a right-of-way closure, we can still reserve the right to have an easement within that space. So if we want to have an easement for pedestrian use, then we can still do that. Or, for example, one that's going to come to you guys next month, it has a water line in it. And so we're going to have a utility easement. And so essentially what that means is that you know, a connection could be built, but you'd still have to have access. Like you couldn't build a permanent structure where we have these reserved easements. But there still could be a benefit to the property that's requesting the closure. Next slide. This is just a list of what we would require them to submit as part of the application. Probably not all inclusive, but what we'll be asking is for them to provide all of the obvious documents. We do want to start asking people what's the purpose and the reason. If there is an associated development project, we'd love to see it. We can't require it, but we would love to be able to look at those and process them in tandem if we can. We want them to at least speak to how their proposal addresses the evaluation considerations. And we obviously need affidavits from the surrounding property owners indicating support. Next slide. And this is outlining the process. It starts with development services with the application. Development services schedules it to the technical review committee, which is a staff level committee, but includes city staff and staff from other agencies like MSD. TRC review happens. They make a recommendation. That recommendation goes to MMTC, which our department schedules. So that's where it transitions from development services to transportation. We have the multimodal review. Assuming that you guys recommend it, then we would schedule it for council. Actually, let me say, even if you deny it or don't recommend it, the applicant still has the ability to continue. They would just be continuing without a positive recommendation. But since it's the city council that it has the ultimate decision-making power on this, they do have the prerogative, they have the ability to take it forward without support. So in between multimodal and council, there's 4 weeks of public hearing, advertising, and then there's the resolution to set the public hearing and intent to close. Then there's the actual public hearing. And since we are still in COVID protocol and we're having virtual meetings, it's actually another meeting at council to actually vote. So right now it's 3 council meetings. So it takes a long time. It's going to be about 3 to 4 months. Once they're not doing virtual meetings anymore, they wouldn't have that last council meeting, so that'll be a little bit quicker, but it is quite a lengthy process. Next slide. So these questions are what I would love to get some feedback on, and they don't necessarily have to be, consensus, or you don't have to make a motion or anything on each of these. But when we bring them forward to you, what do you want to see? Is there anything specific that you want to make sure that I bring other than the documents that are submitted? And the TRC staff report, which we started bringing forward. If you have any suggestions about what would help you in your evaluation, this would be very helpful.
So, Jessica, when you started bringing in the TRC, I think it is recommendations, the list of all the different departments that looked at everything and whether they approved or not, that was super helpful. That just gave us a more rounded picture of what we were looking at. Because otherwise, you look at stuff immediately, and it's hard to make a real quick judgment on it. And if the mapping, I think we talked about this before too, could be a little more robust sometimes too, that would be helpful as well. But the recommendations was great, and why that just added a robustness to the information that was made, more objective information that was really helpful.
Great.
So Jessica, this is Joe. I think I heard you, and correct me if I'm wrong. I guess this is part question and part what I would like to see. I think you mentioned that you can't require them to submit a development plan, and yet I was looking through the draft, ordinance, and it says that they need to submit the development plan. I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is, and I've been saying it even at P&Z a lot, I think there needs to be a development plan. I think, some of what's in that draft where it's, kind of later on how, the development plan and the right-of-way closure kind of work together as it goes through that list of things that happen. I think that's great. I think that needs to happen. When it's just, we want to close this right-of-way and there's kind of some, we don't really know, we don't want to tell you yet, is in my mind a little too vague to be able to say yes to, because you just don't know. Maybe it provides an internal connection, like within the large, like a 40-acre parcel. So.
Yeah, that's something that I think I'm going to have some further conversation with our legal staff on, because my understanding is that we can ask, but we can't require. But at the same time, if they don't give us anything, then how do we show that it's not contrary to the public interest?
Exactly.
And so, yeah. So our approach the last, I'll say 6 months has been, the TRC can't make a recommendation because we don't have any information. And so it's kind of maybe a screwy way, maybe not the best way of trying to force that upon the applicant without technically requiring it. You know what I mean? But I would like to see if we can clarify that so that it isn't kind of a chicken and egg situation.
I just
That
want
would be
to
wonderful.
kudos what Joe is saying. I really think that's smart to, whether it's require or make happen some way. I think that it's hard for us to understand what we're giving up if we don't understand what's being proposed through a development plan.
Mm-hmm.
And Jessica, can these closures be contingent based on a specific plan? And do they sunset or expire if that plan doesn't happen?
That's a very good question also. And I also would like to get some clarification, because my understanding is that there isn't. So if you close it, it's closed. And I don't think that we can condition right-of-way closures. So I don't think we can say, if this isn't built, or if this isn't built per the approved plan, then it gets unclosed. And that's why the need to have them come in tandem with a plan is important. But it's also really difficult because per the law, we're not really supposed to lay like a judgment upon the plan, right? So we have to be really careful to say, okay, here's your plan. I'm going to look at it strictly from these points of view. I'm not going to place judgment on whether it's a affordable housing project or just a housing project or a really cool hotel or a chain hotel. You know what I mean? Like, we have to sort of suspend any kind of judgment about the product and look at the pieces of it.
And one of the things I was thinking about in relation to that kind of contingent closure is, the statement of contrary to the public opinion. I think that simplifies things for us, because we really are focused on from a transportation perspective. And so we can exclude some of those other considerations and just make a recommendation based on, is there a potential for a greenway to go through here? And if that is, I'm generally going to be against it, because I always want the opportunity to connect different areas through a greenway or sidewalk or whatever it might be. And so I feel like that does help, at least from our step in this whole process. It could help us to be a little bit more simplified, because we can be hyper focused on just that, that specific ask. A couple of hands up. Maggie?
Hey, and pardon, there's a chainsaw in the background. I'll do my best. So mine's actually a question, Joe. I'm going to put you on the spot because I just feel like your experience with P&Z is something I'd like to learn from. The question that you have on the slide, Jessica, is about, like, should we charge more than the fees? And the fees are basically like $4,000 the first one you do and $2,000 after that. And my first reaction is like, this is our land. Land is extremely valuable in Asheville, that we're giving it away. And so my instinct is like, man, maybe we could dedicate revenue to transit. Wouldn't that be grand? And that development helps pay for that. I also understand that there's a lot of development that we need in our community, like affordable housing and more, in my opinion, dense housing, things like that, so that when you charge more fees to developers, you make an unfair climate. I guess, Joe, and again, I'm putting you on the spot, and you can say, I don't know, Maggie, if you don't want to speak to it, but like, in the scheme of carrots and sticks that the city has with development, if we were to encourage staff to look at something like just raising those fees or approaching market value with those fees, how influential are these right-of-way closures in making projects happen for like the type of projects that our community wants to see and needs to see? Do you have any thoughts to speak to that to help me learn from your experience?
I'm not going to entirely plead the fifth or plead ignorance.
Fair.
That Create 72 Broadway, I'll just use that as an example. They were, so that was, it did include a hotel. It also had housing. It was going to provide some affordable housing. It was going to have some live work on Market Street. The reason they were wanting to close the alley was partially for egress, ingress to their parking deck, but primarily for trash recycle access. If the fees were raised on that particular project, would it have mattered? Would it have affected their bottom line? No, probably not. As a carrot and stick approach, it gets to that point that we were just talking about and Jessica brought up. You can't, and again, this is one where I tend to push back on legal some too. Like they're saying, legal is saying, the city legal team is saying, we can't, in looking at these right-of-way closures, you can't look at what the development proposal is. And yet it could be used as a carrot in some ways, if you follow what I'm saying, whereas it's like, oh, this development wants to close a right-of-way and they're providing affordable housing. Well, maybe then you don't charge them. They're building a hotel.
Yeah, then we waive this for you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Originally we had written it kind of like you get extra special consideration if you're providing a public benefit, but we can't really look at it that way. So we sort of have to look at if we do have a development proposal associated with it, then we can look at it sort of like as the box that's going to be filled with something, some kind of land use, some kind of use, but we can't really look at what it is that they're going to put in that box.
Randy?
Yeah, sometimes I think what they're going to put in that box is extremely important in terms of the considerations whether we give them that closure or not. Because if they're going to affect negatively the multimodal transportation system on the street by putting a hotel that has access, let's say, dropping off of customers and stuff in front of the hotel, and that's going to really impact the bike and pedestrian traffic on that street, or if they're going to internally route that so it only has, it moves that off of the street, that's really important for us to know. And if we don't know what they're going to do with that property, we can't really make that decision. So that's the situation in which if they can create infrastructure that will not negatively impact multimodal transportation on the street, then that's great. But if they don't create any of that infrastructure and it negatively impacts then the multimodal transportation on the street, that's huge in terms of knowing those things. So it would be in their own best interest if they were going to do something that would be beneficial that way to disclose. And if they don't disclose that, then we might just have to deny things because the potential for negative impact multimodal transportation is there. So, it's the more information that they give us in that kind of situation is helpful for their best interest.
Mm-hmm.
Michael?
So a couple things on that 72 Broadway. That one was clear for me. It was one of the first votes that I had made as commissioner. And that one was like, they're going to be completely displacing the farmers market that's there every week. And it's like one of our only pedestrian-only zones in Asheville that happens on a weekly basis. And that just seemed unacceptable. So that was a huge issue that I just wanted to highlight for historical purposes. And then as far as the question about should we get compensation for the right-of-ways, I'm all about getting any additional funding source that we can that could be directed potentially toward transit, something of that nature. My question is that if the city never accepted the dedicated right-of-way, is it in fact ours? And so I absolutely want to get compensated if it is indeed ours. But if we didn't accept the dedication ever between when it happened and now, is it fair to claim that it's ours and request or require compensation. I would say no.
Joe?
I was just gonna, getting back to what Maggie asked me earlier, and then Michael kind of tied into it. I do agree that the fees should, I think you have to do it as a fee, and I think they should be more in line with what actual land value is. So yes, I agree that the city should receive market rate compensation is perhaps how I would label that number 3. Again, provided that legally, if what Michael just brought up, can the city actually do that legally? It seems like they should be able to, because the city has to give the right to close the alley, even if they haven't necessarily taken it over. So,
Maggie?
Yeah, I want to throw glitter at that. Like, having heard more and having people talk, I want to kind of say too that I really want us to consider raising the fees or encourage council to, or whatever the motion language would look like. It just seems like it's a public asset and we need to manage it in the public's best interest. And if finding revenue for public services is important to us, as it should be, then giving something away under market value is not managing public resources. I also want to encourage maybe a second pushback on legal. Like, I love legal. They keep us safe and out of jail. And I think it's nice sometimes for them to be pushed to really, like, if this was a private business, I might get a second opinion, but often we only have our one legal office. So in lieu of getting a second opinion, I'd like legal to take a second look at if we can discern the product from decision making, because I think we should get market rate. I think that if it's doing something that's in one of our plans, like affordable housing or something we believe in, we should be able to cut the rate to offer that carrot. And I think, Jessica, you could speak to, like, if that pushback on legal ship has sailed, but I would love us to amplify your instinct there if we can by asking for a double look.
Sure. There's a number of things that I want to get more info from them on, and that certainly is one of them. And I'll just say that, right now our fee is $4,000. And I would say pretty much half of that goes towards the advertising, the 4 weeks of advertising that we do, because we have to put it in the Citizen Times for 4 weeks straight. And so that is pretty hefty cost. So we'll say about half goes towards that, and the other half is essentially cost recovery for staff time. Anything that we were able to get on top of that, if we are legally able to, then I would need to find out, what the mechanism for that is. It probably would be market rate, cost of land, which, in different locations is a different number, right? And I also would need to find out if the fee that's collected, that's extra, if you will, it would need to be, like, only used for specific purposes. Like, does there have to be a nexus between the fee and what it's being spent on? So I think, transportation is probably an easier nexus to make, but taking it and spending it on, I don't know, parks and rec programs probably isn't, for example.
Joe?
Fees good? Oh, sorry.
I'll kind of tie into what you just said, Jessica. Definitely, I think it would behoove the city, if they can charge that extra fee, to tie it to, like, sidewalks in that same neighborhood. I'm kind of thinking about the fee in lieu that often developers want to do for sidewalks. Instead of building the sidewalk, they'll do the fee in lieu. The one thing, kind of getting back to that legal pushback, and I don't know, it's been kind of swirling in my head, and I don't know if it would work, but like, if a development proposal comes through for, like, a CZ, there's these list of conditions, and they have to meet those conditions. And they become part of that, essentially, zoning for that piece of property. I don't know if it's possible to do it that a right of way somehow could be conditioned. Like, I don't know. It's a thought, maybe there's some mechanism to say, we were talking about, I think Dennis brought it up, if the development doesn't go through or it changes, does that mean the right of way reverts back? Like maybe somehow in that whole idea of conditions with a conditional zoning, this whole right of way thing there's a way to legally bind it somehow that way. I have no clue.
My understanding is that we cannot condition a right-of-way closure, but I will ask and just make sure.
I'm kind of thinking about it the reverse. Like if it's a CZ, the right of way is a condition. Does that make like it's you're not conditioning the right of way, it's the condition on the zoning.
Right. That could be possible, keeping in mind that I would say most of the ones we've seen are not CZs, so that would have limited applicability. But if it is possible, then I think we should take advantage of it for those situations.
Maggie, did you have a comment?
Nope.
Okay. The one thing that I'm struggling with, and I think Michael kind of brought this up, is market rate. I feel like it connotes ownership, and I know that it's there's technically no ownership that we're talking about here, and without this permission, nothing happens on this space. But are we creating a problem for ourselves there in that language? And then secondly, to your point, I wonder if there's maybe two paths that we can create. One path is you share with us, and maybe there's some information, and the path might be a little less bumpy, and the other path maybe is a little bit longer if you want to maybe not be so forthcoming about what your plan is. And I don't know if that's feasibly, functionally be able to something that we could do, but it might encourage folks to be a little bit more forthcoming, and also give us more information with which to make a more informed decision.
Okay.
One other comment I had, and I don't know kind of what the scope of work here is that we're talking about, is there a way that we can go through, how many pieces are out there? Can we go through and categorize them as ABC, proactively? So when they come to us, we have this, this label that we can start from. Does that make sense, or does that just kind of spinning our wheels here?
Let me think on that. There are so many. And you don't even know they're there unless you happen to be looking at a plat, or because someone's come to you and asked a question about it. It's kind of insane how many there are. So my initial reaction is that probably would be too onerous.
Okay. Joe, did you have a comment?
I'm sorry, I forgot to lower it, but actually I do now. Are you trying to say, Dennis, like that? I guess maybe what you're looking at or asking for is there a way to categorize these and say these are more priority because they provide a potential for connection? These are like way down the list because there's no way. I would almost say that it's like concentric circles from downtown. Like anything within the CBD is like again, if we could make them have a development plan, like you have to provide this, you have to show absolutely 100% that it does not have a detriment to the public if you're in the CBD. If it's this next ring, it's, that may be some way to categorize the importance. Does that kind of get to what you're asking about, Dennis?
Yeah, I really like that idea. I was more thinking of, is there an application for through transit? Can you get through? Does it? Sometimes they come to us and it's, they dead into a structure, and it literally will, there's no way that can ever be used. And so that I feel like that is a completely different situation. But I also really like the idea of, we really need to be as resourceful as possible with any piece that's near the CBD, because it is, like to your point, just so valuable and so important, because we have already kind of given away so much connectivity there to start with. Jessica, are you looking for any more specific response here?
No, I don't think so. I wasn't going to ask for like a motion to recommend approval or anything, because I think there's still a lot of questions that need to be answered and asked, and likely, therefore, some revisions to the draft. And so we will follow up and bring it back with changes.
Perfect. I know that this is something that we've it's come up multiple times, so it's really good to see it. And I feel like we're, there's a lot of good info in here. So I know that Joe, I'm sure, is very happy as well.
Yeah, I've got one quick other thing, and this kind of gets to number 2, Jessica, about full closures versus partial closures, and that idea that the city can maintain a utility easement. Like, if we're talking about, like, let's just say a full road closure, so a 25 or 30 foot swath, it seems like it would be a great way to say, okay, we're not going to do this full. We'll give you a partial. We're going to maintain this, part of that right of way as a utility easement, and then perhaps it can be a pedestrian or some other connection. So we're still maybe providing or allowing for a future connection, but we're also, it's that balance. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, that is an alternative that we can look at in these individual situations for sure.
Okay, great. Any other comments? Excellent. All right. Next item. Let's see, where are we here? We're going to go into unfinished business, the Merriman Avenue update. Jessica, switching gears hard.
Yeah. So just a quick update. At our last meeting, we had a very extensive conversation about Merriman, and the result of that is a joint meeting between the city, some city staff, specifically transportation and planning, and NCDOT division staff, and 3 members of the commission here, I believe, Randy, Maggie, and I think Dennis. Are you doing it too? Are you in that meeting too?
No, I don't believe I'm in that meeting.
Oh, okay. So 2 members of the commission will be attending that meeting. It is scheduled for May 3rd, which is next Monday, I believe. And earlier today, I sent an email out to the entire Multimodal Commission with links to 2 documents. That one of them is a timeline history, just to try to bring everybody up to speed on what's taken place over the last several years, as well as a staff report. It was the staff report that I was preparing to bring to y'all back in January. And then we paused that to have some further conversations with them, with DOT. And so DOT has seen all of this information, and it's essentially going to be kind of the jumping off point for the meeting that we have with them on May 3rd. And so at the next multimodal meeting, we will be certain to have a follow-up conversation about this topic.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I went through that document, the timeline, the draft report, is fantastic. There's such good information. It really gives you a perspective for why things have happened and why it's really important for us to see what we can get done here.
And something real quick too, I want to echo that. The staff report was great. You guys did a really good job with that. And it helps us then to advocate, just knowing what the city position is. I think this is really important at this meeting. We're a citizen group coming forth to say, well, you need to include us in this process. And knowing where the city stands with that really helps us to be an effective advocate in a way that perhaps the city can't be. So the city makes their position, and we are hopefully that voice. So really appreciate the preparation you did for that. That's helpful.
Yeah, I'll just jump.
Thank you.
Sorry, that was Maggie trying to jump in and say, totally agreed. Randy, thanks. And then it'd be good, Randy, if you had time to chat before that meeting with DOT, and I'd welcome anyone else, since, we're not trying to show up the entire committee at this meeting, but if anyone else wants to just say yay, I can doodle poll us and we can find time in the next couple of days. I'd love anybody else's thoughts involved before we have that conversation. Otherwise, we could report out to the whole group later.
Excellent. Okay, next item is the transit budget update.
Right. Just real quick, we got good news a couple weeks ago. I virtually attended the North Carolina Public Transit Association annual meeting. of course, a lot of people were wanting to know whether the legislature is going to be giving us or reinstating our SMAP money. So for urban systems, we get state maintenance funds. And then for rural systems, they have their own pot of money, both of which were rescinded this past fiscal year from the state. And it's not 100% because, there hasn't been a budget vote yet, but we are supposed to be getting our SMAP money back. And that is extremely important. That's about $1.1 million of transit funding that supports the system. And the loss of that this past year was, really significant because we basically had to use the CARES Act money that we got to plant that. So it's pretty certain, unless something really crazy happens, it sounds like the lobbying that took place all across the state to get that put back in place has worked. And so that's really good news. In terms of the second round of stimulus, or I guess I should say the third round of stimulus, the American Rescue Plan, it's still a little bit up in the air as to what the city will receive. I can tell you that we, at a minimum, will receive $1.8 million. And we are having conversations with Buncombe County and the other transit agencies in our region about whether or not they would be willing to, hand us some of their money. But that will be discussed at the MPO probably in the next month or two. And so I'll keep you guys updated. But we will be receiving at least $1.8 million from that.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
Maggie, do you have a question?
I didn't mean to, no.
Okay, gotcha. All righty. The next item is the revisit of the bike share plan.
I just kept this on the agenda, but I don't have anything new to share on this item.
Okay, great.
So my question is, what's our next step with that? So I think we've made a recommendation, right, to move the electric scooters, e-scooters from that and move forward, but I don't know what happens next.
That's a good question. I think that probably the next step is for us to, at one of these meetings, go back through the recommendations, minus the scooter recommendations, settle on a bike share type and forward that as the recommendation. And, the last time back in May of 2019, one of the big issues that was sort of a blockade, if you will, was the cost. I think that we should ignore that part for now and just decide what it is that we would want, because my hope is that if there is, knock on wood, an infrastructure bill, that this would be a project that would be a good project to spend it on.
Yeah, and again, too, we're all ready to go with that too. Usually those are the kind of ones that get funded first. So if we say, this is our recommendation, we're all ready to go. We just need the whatever millions of dollars to make it happen, and then we can grab that, hopefully, and run. So I think that'd be great.
Yeah.
Joe?
So I would like to maybe have this be a definite thing for our next meeting that we dedicate maybe 30 minutes to.
Yeah, that sounds great. Joe?
Just in the context of that, and I forgot to bring it up earlier in the meeting, I would love to, in talking about pushing back on legal, I really would like to revisit the complete absolute ban on e-scooters, because just the other day I saw someone going down the sidewalk on Merriman commuting, and I'm like, little does she know she is violating the law. So I hated it when that happened, and I still hate it, and I really, really would like to see that, like, somehow it has to be that you could use a scooter of your own personal use in the city.
How about I add that to a future agenda item? Okay.
Excellent. Okay, next is the update on the citywide default speed limit reduction to 25 mph.
Okay, I do have a little bit of new info and have provided some links for your viewing pleasure related to this. So there have been some other cities that have proposed bills to do what we're talking about. Durham is one. I think somebody else did as well. Barb had been in communication with their bike ped coordinator who said, yeah, we have this bill proposed, but we've had it proposed the last several sessions and it didn't go anywhere. So we're going to keep an eye on that and see if it actually succeeds. But it's basically saying that the city of Durham can do a default speed limit to 25. Separately, we are starting to go through our GIS mapping and look at that and make sure that we have accurate GIS data as to the speed limit. If you click on that and look at it, there's definitely some missing links and segments that need to be fixed. So that is a work in progress. And then the last attachment is the ordinance that we have in place that outlines speed limits that we've changed historically. So if you look at that, it's a very long list, and it's broken down by speed limit. And so one of the other tasks we're going to do is compare and make sure that our GIS data reflects speed limit changes that have been done via ordinance. So, and then, through that, we'll also be able to see what hasn't been changed, what is still 35 by default, and is there anything else on the list that we would want to change, or should we just pursue a blanket speed limit reduction, or should it be kind of piecemealed like we've been doing now? Right now, I don't really have a sense of the difference between the two. I know that the list of changes in the ordinance are substantial, but I can't visualize that against what hasn't been changed and what is still the default, if that makes sense. So we're working on it. We're making progress.
So you know what?
Oh, go ahead, Randy. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I just jumped in because I was looking. I didn't see a thing. But I just noticed on this ordinance you included, Thompson Street in its entirety is still listed on here as 20 miles an hour, and it was recently moved to 25 miles an hour. And I've asked a number of times why that was, and no one's been able to answer that question. So according to this, it's supposed to be still 20 miles an hour, but the posting got changed in the last 6 months or so to 25.
Okay, we'll follow up on that.
I don't know. No one seems to know what happened there, so I don't know.
Michael?
Okay.
Jessica, that piece of legislation that came out of Durham, is that a local legislation, or is that something that would be passed? It would affect us here in Asheville as well. Because I think at one point we said we have to specifically get permission per municipality. Would that one just be expansive?
It's specifically written just for Durham. So if you look at I think it's the applicability section of the bill, it says this would only apply to Durham. So yeah,
how do we get?
It would
how
not
do we?
apply to us.
Okay, so next question for follow-up: what's our step for doing the same thing here in Asheville?
Well, if we got to that point, then we would have to have a bill brought forward through the legislature.
Okay.
Yeah, not an easy thing. So that's kind of why I want to get a sense of the scale of what might be remaining, if you will, and maybe it's possible to make some changes piecemeal like we've been doing. Maybe that's easier than going to the legislature. I don't know. That's kind of what we're in this process of trying to figure out what the landscape is, and we also need to keep an eye on Durham still, because if they get shot down, which they have been over the last several sessions, then I would all but guarantee that ours would as well. So that's where we're at.
Okay. All right. Next items. So we have the committee updates. Transit committee. I think John unfortunately had to step away for a work commitment. So the documents are attached for this month's reports. Greenway. I can give that. Lydia? Do you want to give an update on Greenway?
No, I was going to say not at the moment.
Okay.
I'm trying to recall. I feel like we just mainly talked about the Wilma Dykeman Greenway opening and that is now open.
Yeah, that was the big one. It's officially, the name happened, and then we had a soft opening last week of that with an event, and it was well attended by folks that have been involved, and they talked about folks that the mayor spoke, and she mentioned how there's been people involved in this for 20 plus years. So it was it's quite a coup, and good to see open, and a great model for us to kind of go forward and spread that across the city. Then Bike and Ped Task Force. Randy, you want to give a quick update?
Yeah, so just part of the Bike Ped Task Force, we've been meeting every month for a long time now, and we've been doing lots of stuff lately. So the corridor study for Biltmore McDowell was presented kind of their, I don't know if it's the final draft or whatever recently, and they covered a lot of things in the public meeting, way too much that we could go over in the public meeting. And so we asked them if they could speak at a Bike Ped Task Force. We could go over it in more detail. And so apparently that's not in the consultant's scope of work, but the city staff is going to present, because there's just a lot of detail in there. And they said, well, you can look at the recording, but the recording didn't go into a lot of the nitty gritty stuff. And so I think that's going to happen soon. And then we did some counts on Amboy Road in the Wilma Dykeman Greenway and the crossing of the bridge there. And it's just a huge issue, and there's so many people using it, and the counts are just, and then they stop a lot of times. And we don't know what their intended purpose was of their transportation trip, but a lot of them are not going across that bridge, which is super uncomfortable to go because there's only like a wide curb for people to go through. So NCDOT is putting $300,000 towards improvements of that, and they're still trying to figure that out exactly, but they're making progress. So I really give it to NCDOT for addressing this in the short term with a long-term vision later, but to do something now at least, which is great. And we have numbers to back that up in terms of it being something needed. And we also discussed possibly having a three-way stop on the west side of the bridge there, where it goes into the park, because that's an uncontrolled intersection right now, well, or minimally controlled intersection, and it's difficult to use. So again, that's working on that. And then the traffic light on the other side, possibly having an all-stop cycle as well, to be able to facilitate pedestrian and bike movement without having the threat of cars in the intersection at the same time. So lots of talk still about that and trying to solve some of the issues that have been created by the extreme popularity of that 20-year project to getting the Greenway there. And then we talked about, again, trying to raise our scope on the People for Bikes evaluation scale. So we already had a League of American Bicyclists bronze level rating, but now People for Bikes has a scale, which we're really lacking in. So we're trying to identify specific ways that we can be more bike friendly according to their criteria. They're moving forward with the repaving of Meadow Road, where it's just in horrible shape, and trying to put in wider shoulders there. I have my notes here too, but make it so there's maybe I don't know if it's actually technically a bike lane or not, but there'll be something there to give bikes more protection. And then Richmond Hill, which is in the news a lot because of that development and jackknife trucks and stuff trying to get in off of the bridge road there. But they're going to repave that with 4-foot shoulders too, so that'll be helpful for bikes and pedestrians not to feel like they're always in the way or backing up traffic so much right there, because they'll have a little bit of space again too. So yeah, lots of good stuff happening for sure, even if it's in small increments. It's definitely progress. So thanks.
Absolutely, thank you. Michael, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, Randy, on that Meadow Road repaving, I noticed a couple days ago when I was running out there that they've got some sharrows up for bikes. Is that what? Do you know if that's the goal is to have sharrows, or I mean, because it seems like it'd be wide enough to put a lane in. Is there any clarification on that?
Yeah, they didn't talk about sheer arrows there, so I'm trying to find my notes specifically on that. But they money to widen metal roads with shoulders with striped buffer. So that's what the report was at the meeting, that they're going to have shoulders with a striped buffer. So the shoulder would be a little bit narrower, but there'd be a striped buffer there. But they didn't talk about sheer arrows. And actually, so that's an interesting thing too, because a shoulder is different than a bike lane. The bike lane would be signed and it'd be specifically for bikes, but minimum state width is 5 foot, which is narrow for sure. So if it's not 5 foot, it can't be considered a bike lane. So if it's any less than that, then it'd be a shoulder. And so then normally you wouldn't have sheer arrows in that situation, because there is that extra space for someone to go there, even if it wasn't technically a bike lane. Now they may be putting sheer arrows in right now just before they repave it, just to try and let cars know that bikes are going to be all over the lanes there, trying to find the one smooth path through the rough road that's there. But yeah, that's not my understanding. At least wasn't the plan when they resurfaced it to have sharrows, but they have the shoulder with the buffered lane there.
Great, thanks. Next, Joe with P&Z.
Yeah, I want to make, before I get into P&Z stuff, 2 quick comments on I was looking at the Transit Committee notes. I think it's great that the Rotary Club donated some bus shelters for down on Hendersonville Road. Hats off to them for doing that. And I also saw that there's a draft report on the transit maintenance garage feasibility study. And it would be great if at some point, we don't necessarily have to have it like as an agenda item, but if we could even just see that when that goes to the Transit Committee, if we just can see that report, I think would be great. As far as P&Z stuff, as far as P&Z stuff, we didn't really have anything major last month. There were a couple minor things, some 160D legal things going on. I will say that if you have any thoughts or opinions on the Charlotte Street development, to send them in, or stay tuned for what may be a very, very long meeting next Wednesday.
All right. Well, good luck with that. That'll be bring you a pack of lunch. Anna wasn't able to make it. She had a work conflict today, so we'll get an update from her next month on the advisory neighborhood advisory committee. I-26. Do we have any update there?
No, we do not.
Okay, great. As always, we have our list of projects that are attached. Just drill into those, and there's more information you could ever wish for on everything. It's a lot of good info. We have our future agenda items list. Of course, if you want anything added to that, just let us know. We can always get that in there. Any additional public comment? I'm going to take that as a no. Note our next meeting is May 26th. If there's no other comment, we can move to adjourn. Everybody good? All right, we're adjourned. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.